Okay. Okay, so yes, again, thank you for having me here to talk about Da Vinci burden reduction, give an overview of the workflow, what's involved in this use case, talk about our Connectathon work and efforts that have gone on over the last few years, and even give a few insights from the most recent Connectathon that we had in September. So while I do know that I see on the attendee list, I know several of you, and I've actually worked on Connectathons with a few of you, obviously Mike and Scott and Rakesh, but so there's a few of you that don't know who I am. So just again, let me give a brief introduction so you know why I'm the one actually standing here talking to you. And my name is Jeff Brown. I'm an HL7 certified educator. I'm a principal healthcare standards advisor at Lantana Consulting Group. So most of you have probably heard of us. I'm part of the Da Vinci Burden Reduction Core leadership team. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. I've got over 25 years working with HL7 standards, V2, V3, CDA, FIRE, certified in FIRE, CDA, and V3 RIM. Again, certified educator, FIRE. I'm on the technical steering committee at HL7. I'm also part of the fire management group at HL7 and also on the education advisory council. So I help create the educational efforts that we have to instruct the community. Currently, I'm co-chair of the Implementable Technology Specifications Work Group, but along with Mark Scrimshire, who's on here, I used to be on the financial management work group for many years. And I've got over 35 years of experience in software engineering and data architecture. So enough about me. Let's talk about burden reduction. So most everyone that hears burden reduction knows the primary use case. And I say primary use case, split into multiple implementation guides. So theoretically, we could handle other use cases, but for all intents and purposes, we're talking prior authorization. Okay, and the two main actors that we're dealing with are going to be the provider's EHR system and back office systems and the payer. And as you can see left and right, so I will go over a very high level overview of the flow, and then I'll dig in a little deeper on each of the components and talk a little bit more about that. Then we will get into the Connectathon itself, and I think some of the efforts that we make, it might make a little bit more sense to everyone why we do things the way we do them. So first of all, the first implementation guide that is part of burden reduction is called Coverage Requirements Discovery. And that name is less used than its acronym, CRD. So we use CRD for Coverage Requirements Discovery. The IG lead and author is Lloyd McKenzie. I think most of you know him. The primary technology leveraged between the two actors involved in this use case will be CDS hooks. And I'll talk in more depth about what CRD actually is doing for that coverage requirements discovery, although the name implies most of it. That leads us on into documentation, templates, and rules. Again, it's a mouthful, but it's DTR. And I am the IG lead and the author of DTR. Let me back up one step though and say CRD is an IG that is sponsored by the Financial Management Work Group, DTR by the Clinical Decision Support Work Group, and then we move on into Prior Authorization Support, or PAS, we call it, PAS, PAS. The IG lead and author is Jean Duteau. This IG is also a financial management implementation guide. One thing you'll notice as you look down the middle is the primary technology being leveraged in a more general sense. So CDS hooks for CRD, just standard FIRE APIs for DTR, and then the box that's in between prior authorization support, or PAS, is a FIRE bundle, and there'll be attachments, which we'll talk about, and a transform layer. So you'll notice the X12278 request and response being thrown in there. So that's legacy from a HIPAA law that says that a prior authorization submission has to be in the X12278 form at some point in the exchange, basically. And while this is what you're seeing right now as the core components of DaVinci burden reduction, the 3 implementation guides, that's what we call the core IGs. I want to talk a little bit more about what's called the CMS enforcement discretion. What this allows us to do is to basically address that X12 component I was just telling you about. And this is I say relatively new, it's been over a year now that this has been in effect, but the enforcement discretion addresses that HIPAA law that I said the X12 278 is the exchange format that has to be supported. And while we're not abandoning that, that's not been done away with. We still have to support that. The enforcement discretion means if you want a pure fire end-to-end exchange to do prior authorization submissions, you will not be penalized for it. And you'll also notice in the middle here, I have potential PA approval for both CRD and DTR. I can talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but this is a capability that's been there the whole time, but we could never leverage it because of the requirement for the X12 component. Again, very high level. I'll dig into more of this in details. But last but not least, while it's not part of the burden reduction core IGs, we do leverage CDEX, Clinical Data Exchange. The IG lead and author is Eric Haas. This IG is sponsored by the PI work group. And this is used for the attachments piece of prior authorization. Again, something else I'll talk a little more about, but this is the high level overview of what we're dealing with when we deal with the use case of prior authorization and the way that DaVinci's implementation guides are addressing this topic. And this screen that you're about to see is not meant to be fully read because there's a lot on it. It's mainly to give you kind of a sense as to the various players in this high level. We're digging in a little bit more deeply. So again, prior authorization, you'll notice from left to right, provider, back office, and EHR, where CDEX falls, and you'll see how this flows out in the diagrams below, but the native DTR app, intermediaries, CDS hook service, DTR endpoints, so forth, all the way to the prior auth processing on the right. This shows a little bit more of the complexity that's going into it, even though this is still very high level. For those of you that know some about burden reduction, you'll know how intricate some of these exchanges can be. But for CRD, you'll see some of where the CDS hooks fall into it. Don't worry if I seem like I'm just skimming over, because I'll dig into each one of these a lot more deeply here in just a moment. But this will give you kind of a sense as to where, for example, the order sign hook gets triggered when a provider is actually placing an order for a patient real time, sitting in front of the patient. And this gets triggered over on the payer side, or technically most likely through an intermediary. But the CDS hook service makes those determinations about coverages and such, and can send the response back, all transparent behind the scenes. Then, of course, we move on to DTR. So DTR is documentation, templates, and rules. So this is really the workhorse of gathering additional documentation that's necessary to support that prior authorization request. Again, we'll talk more about that in a moment, but you'll see how CQL is involved in that. So if you're not familiar with the clinical quality language, this is our extraction method for pulling data from an EHR to pre-populate questionnaires in format on the screen. And where this can fall in the workflow is variable, which we'll talk about in a minute. But just to get a sense as to the questionnaires are the fundamental piece of DTR and what its functionality is all about in gathering that additional information. It's not about unstructured data. It's not about anything else. It's about answering questions through questionnaires, whether standard or adaptive. And then, of course, we get down to pass. This is the real workhorse of the prior authorization submission, response handling, and so forth. This is really where all that power lies. determination of coverage takes place first, then you have to gather additional documentation, and then you have to actually handle submitting the request for prior authorization. And as I mentioned earlier, you'll see that here down below to the right, you'll see where there's a conversion between the fire information that we have gathered into the X12278 and the exchanges that take place there. The green boxes you see on the right and left sides basically show things that we're not fully representing or at all representing in this diagram. So there's a lot to this process, but a little bit deeper dive for you. So CRD, Coverage Requirements Discovery. As I said at the beginning, CRD, Coverage Requirements Discovery, the name in itself tells the story. It's about the requirements of coverage and discovering what those are for a patient when a service is being ordered or along that workflow in the provider's office. Okay, so I'm not going to read through all this information on the screen, but this will be for everyone to take a look at later. But it does take the guesswork out of determining coverages, whether the patient actually has insurance, not only has insurance, but has the coverage for the particular service that the provider is requesting. And also, is there any other requirements on that, such as prior authorization? Is it necessary? Is it not? If it is, will there be additional documentation that's automatically needed to support that request? So this is the flow. So again, won't read all this. What we want to focus on is this diagram. So in this diagram, let's say the provider orders an MRI. Okay. Again, behind the scenes, it invokes the service, sends prefetch data, possibly, hopefully, to help facilitate the process. And this is where the actual CDS hook gets triggered. That's over in the payer's system. So this will send that information over, make that, send the appropriate information and make that request. And then the payer's CDS service will actually do all of the checking to make those determinations of the coverage, all the requirements in that coverage, and send back the appropriate response. Of course, back on the client side, we have to evaluate that response. And one possibility in many cases will be that there is no prior authorization necessary. So if that's the case, we're good to go. And the provider hasn't been bugged by any screens or having to go do anything at all. So it's pretty seamless in that respect. But what we're talking about is the case where it needs a prior authorization and in many cases needs to launch DTR. Because as we know that there's going to be probably by far the majority of cases, there's going to be at least some additional information necessary, or the payer will insist upon having some additional information to support any prior authorization request that is made for that particular service that was indicated to the payer. Now, one thing that I want to be very clear about, because there has been some ambiguity maybe in some of the discussions we've had, I want to be very clear that CRD does not launch DTR. Okay, this is pointing to it to say that you will need to launch DTR in that case. But what basically happens here is that the payer's response comes back and indicates through a fire extension, a massive coverage information fire extension applied to the service request, to indicate that yes, prior authorization is needed. There will be additional documentation, and most likely there'll be a canonical of the questionnaire that will need to be retrieved from the payer to be filled out. At this point, the indication is through what's called a system action. So no CDS hook card being popped up in front of the provider. This allows us to return the information to the system and then let that EHR system, or the provider system in general, to make the determination of when is the most appropriate time to fill out this questionnaire or set of questionnaires. So CRD returns the proper information to say you need to launch DTR, but it will be upon the the client system to actually do the launching of that, but we'll have all the context of the patient and everything. So now we jump into DTR. Again, a lot of information here. Hopefully it'll be very useful to you, but really want to focus on the diagram. This is how we can walk through what takes place, because DTR can be launched in a what we call a manual launch, standalone launch, but for most cases, it's going to be that CRD makes that determination that it's needed, and then the system can launch DTR with that context returned. So once the DTR app is launched, and DTR is just an application, okay? It can be, in most cases, it will probably be actually a Smart on Fire app. A lot of advantages to going with Smart on Fire framework, a lot of consistency, a lot of standardization. But there's also something we call a native app, which means it's native to the EHR. So an EHR vendor can develop their own internal app to be launched to do DTR. So two different pathways you can go with that. But regardless, you're going to load that context that CRD provided, the patient and the service request and the CQL, the questionnaire, excuse me, canonical, and it says it retrieves the questionnaire and CQL from the payer. What that is an operation that is immediately called to the payer's endpoint for DTR. That is the questionnaire package. Okay, we call it the questionnaire package operation. It returns what we like to call the package, which is a bundle of information. It's questionnaires, it's actually CQL libraries, it's value sets that are necessary, all the information needed by the client to execute the forms appropriately, and with the information that the payer deems necessary to pre-populate that as fully as possible. And what we mean by that is CQL libraries that are coming back would be defined by the payer so that the client can take that, execute it against their EHR, and that would get as much information as possible to pre-populate a form that is built based on the questionnaire. So hopefully there's minimal entry necessary, maybe a few adjustments, modifications, whatever it may be, a review. But again, we take the CQL, we pre-populate. The query for missing information is just that. If the EHR does not support that information, or for whatever reason it can't find that information or retrieve it, then someone, the provider or back office staff, whichever it may be, would fill in that information on the form. Now, some of you may have caught me talking about standard versus adaptive forms earlier, or standard versus adaptive questionnaires. If you're not familiar with that, and again, DTR is built on structured data capture, which is its own implementation guide. Adaptive forms are very different than standard. Standard is what most people would think of when they think of a questionnaire, which is a long set of questions and some internal logic to say, if you answer this one, you don't need to answer that one, and so forth and so on. But basically, with a standard questionnaire, they call the questionnaire package operation the payer. They get back that standard questionnaire, and they're done communicating with the payer, basically. It's up to them to take all that, fill it out, present it to the user, and gather the information. There's obviously some advantages to that. Adaptive questionnaires give us a much more robust ability and some advantages that may not be on the surface even noticed. Adaptive means that you will get like one or two, maybe just a few, but in many cases, maybe a single question in that initial questionnaire. And it will indicate that it's adaptive, which means you answer that question, and then you actually send that back to the payer asking for the next question. The payer can evaluate the way that that first question was answered, or set of questions, and based on how it was answered, evaluate it and determine what's the next question necessary. And that's an iterative process that would go around and around. Uh, very sharp in terms of how it actually can make determinations from that, because it's not just sending back a questionnaire to be filled out and then the payer doesn't know any more about it. This is actually a very interactive process where the payer is making determinations as it goes as to what to ask next. And one of the advantages, as I showed on one of the previous diagrams, is that in a happy path, that with adaptive, there can be enough information asked and appropriate information asked by the payer to make a determination that they could already give you a prior authorization approval and assign that ID. So this is the part that the enforcement discretion allows us, because before that would not have included an X12 format, and so it would not have been legal. So the capability was there, but we couldn't really do anything with it. Now we can. So for approvals only, if the payer makes a determination, the final question back to the client side could be, we can actually give you the prior authorization ID now. Do you want it? As a matter of fact, if they want to assign that, they have to ask that question last, because the client may not want it at that time. But anyway, there's obviously many advantages to using adaptive forms and a few downsides in terms of the iterative process. Regardless of whether you're using standard or adaptive, the next step will be, when you're done with that, you store the resulting data, and then most likely you're going to launch PAS. And I say most likely because, again, these are 3 independent implementation guides. Outside of prior authorization, DTR could be used in many, many use cases to capture information. So it's not always launching PAS, but for our purposes in burden reduction, the next step would be to take that information and launch the prior authorization support. Now, the way that this is laid out on the slide is obviously a little different, but I think this is a little better uh, explanation. So you can see that once that information is gathered and prior authorization support PAS can assemble all that into the FHIR bundle, can do any uh, mappings and translations that it has to do for the X12278, any information that's necessary, then it can actually pass that along. You see the translation that takes place. Most likely, and it's not shown on here, but there will be an intermediary, whether it's independent or part of the payer, that will take that, can do the translation, can actually send it over to the payer, and the payer can take advantage of the FHIR bundle, can gather the information from the 278, however it wants to do that. And then, of course, it generates the response, sends it back, makes its way back to the provider. And this is the area where you see that the CMS enforcement discretion has the impact, and the parts that would disappear basically out of that, uh, the entire flow, if you decided to actually do a fire to fire. Again, I want to be very, very forthright and clear about this, but we're not getting rid of the X12 support. The X12 support is still in PAS. It's still a huge part of that and will probably be leveraged for quite a while. But now we have the capability in certain circumstances to do just a fire to fire exchange. A couple of other pieces in PAS that are very important, and this is becoming more and more mature as each Connectathon goes by, each set of updates take place, because at one point subscriptions was brand new to PAS, but not so much anymore. But originally it was polling. Let me explain if you're not familiar with this. So in the natural workflow of prior authorization, once that request has been placed with the payer makes the determination. They can say, they look at the information, give you an approval. Look at the information, a denial. But then also there's another one called appended response, meaning there's more research that has to be done for various reasons. It's going to take a little bit more time. When that response comes back in previous efforts, either to automate or even in the manual world, it was always upon the provider side to check back. To basically, in a manual world, it would be they send you back the letter saying that they can't make the determination now. Check later, check back later, and then you're like, okay, I'll call the office. Do you have the information? Nope. Okay, so how long do you wait to call back? Um, do I wait longer after I call the first time? Do I, how do you check back? It's very inefficient. And the computer system does the same thing in polling, which means the provider system is polling the payer periodically to find out, have you made a determination yet? Subscriptions in FHIR allows us to not have to worry about that anymore. And as you see in the note on the left-hand side, this is the R5 subscription backport IG that is implemented. The reason for that, in short, is that R4 subscriptions were um, problematic, very rudimentary, and not as useful as they should have been. So this was corrected in R5, but to make R4 be able to handle some of that, the subscription backport IG was developed, primarily under the guidance of Gino Canessa. But what this allows us is that the provider system can actually post a subscription to the payer, and when that pending response comes back, it says, okay, it's pended, you have to do more determination. You've basically in that subscription given them your address to say, you let me know when you have that determination made. Much more efficient. Provider system doesn't have to keep checking back. It will be alerted from the payer through that subscription at the point that a determination is made. Much more efficient and a lot more complex to implement initially from a development standpoint, but well worth it in the long run. And then again, the additional documentation, the request for additional documentation, pending response, attachments, many people still refer to it as. This is where CDEX comes into it, because that's what CDEX does, is gather that additional documentation, the clinical documentation. Without walking through every little piece of how this works, suffice it to say that the request from the payer saying it's pended because I still need more information. I still need even more additional documentation. Maybe because I've looked through what you sent and that triggered some more questions that need to be answered. So that comes back and comes back to PAS, would launch CDEX. Now CDEX could go two different paths. It may be having to pull up a PDF and send it back to them, or a Word document, or something else unstructured. And that's fine. CDEX can certainly handle that. But what we're concerned about is now, if they indicate a specific LOINC code that was created just for this particular use case, that would indicate that, hey, we're sending back another questionnaire canonical, and we're going to launch DTR, because that's what DTR does, is questionnaires. And so it can relaunch DTR. DTR can present this new questionnaire and gather it up and send it on back. So one question that came up at a report out at one of the working group meetings over the last year or so, I forget when it was, will it only do it that one time? What if there's even more information necessary? Well, there's no limit currently in place. So you could do this multiple times. However, hopefully not that many, but you could, in theory, do that multiple times. So I hope that's clear. So that's really the overview of what burden reduction is. Those of you that are on the burden reduction public calls, or on our focus group calls, or have been part of the Connectathons in the past, understand just how complicated some of these pieces really are, but being handled, I think, in a really great way, and the community coming together to bring together payers, providers, vendors, the entire community to um, provide the input on how this needs to be developed. It's still an ongoing process, and we're still refining it, obviously, but it's showing such great promise, and we're getting great feedback from those that are doing production work with it. So one of the keys to doing that is obviously testing, and testing, as we all know, is uh, done through not just on-site testing or between partners working off the side, but we have fire connectathons for that. And burden reduction track has historically been one of the largest tracks that we've had, if not the largest track that had a fire connectathon. Uh, Various reasons for that. Multiple implementation guides being leveraged. Obviously, the focus on prior authorization is the main driving force, but with that, fluctuates quite a bit, but we usually have a great turnout. But I think the key to what we've been able to do as a team, and I say a team, we've got a lot of consistent players that come back for testing. Uh, some come and go as necessary, and that's fine. Uh, there's always the business expectations that have to be addressed, but we have a great team that has been there at least since I've started, and I started doing burden reduction back in 2022, early 2022. And we started something a couple of years ago, a conversation between Viet Nguyen and myself. Um, we decided on doing Connectathon planning calls instead of just trying to reach out to the community, encourage people to show up, and then start testing. We decided to have planning calls. Um, and we have these, and we've been doing these for the last at least couple of years. Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. We're encouraging any active testers to join. And I underline active testers because we really want to focus on the ones who are planning on showing up and digging in and getting their systems to work and connecting with others, just to keep the meetings very lean and focused and productive. Continues between every Connectathon. So like in September when we finished up and I did the report outs, and the next week we took off away from it just to get a breath. Then I started them back up, and it's really great. Now the consistency is helpful. Gives us a great way to have very comprehensive preparation for the Connectathon. So it identifies the potential use case scenarios so we can start aligning partners and determining what needs to be tested. What are the participants in there? What capabilities do they have? As you saw, there's a lot of different parts in burden reduction, and building it out is not just build the whole thing all at once. We start at one point. Most start at CRD, which is the logical starting point, and go from there. But not everything is going to be something that everyone has to offer. So this helps us identify that. And we coordinate those testing scenarios. So we build everything off by scenarios. This allows us to verify any security communication requirements in advance. We don't want to get to like an in-person Connectathon and spend the first part of the Connectathon, as anyone that's been there knows, it's 2 days, but it's really a day and a half. But we don't want to spend that first Saturday just working through firewall issues or anything before we can actually test burden reduction. So this helps us identify the exchange partners, the scenarios being tested, then they can validate that they have all the authentication and credentials necessary and so forth. Really helps us hit the ground running at the Connectathon. Has proven itself to make us very efficient when we get there. Granted, things pop up that we don't expect, but that's minimal because we've tried to take care of as much as we can ahead of time. This is a little example of what our Connectathon track page looks like. At the bottom, we have testing scenarios and roles, and you'll see how we've identified the scenarios. This is from a few Connectathons ago. This wasn't the most recent one. But it shows you how we start identifying, okay, these are the teams that are going to be testing. Like on the top row, you see InterSystems and Cambia providing certain functionalities they're testing. On down, you'll see Onyx and Epic and MITRE and all the different players. So each one, we fill this out. This is what we do during our Connectathon planning calls. So the scenarios, what role they're actually playing, what parts they're actually testing. Inside paths, we include any information regarded for CDEX and attachments. Outreach for testing, this is where systems and attendees and participants will put in information saying, hey, I would like someone to offer maybe a CDS hooks service so I can test my my front end on that, or DTR app, or I'm actually offering something up if anyone needs that. So this is a great opportunity for us, and this goes on, and we refine this as we go through. And we also support breakout sessions, and this is from the most recent Connectathon in September. And you'll see we had a joint session about the clinical reasoning and burden reduction CQL-based questionnaires for prior authorization that Brennan and I led. Then we had burden reduction implementer updates from myself, Lloyd, and John. AMA, Dennis did a fantastic job presenting on terminology mapping, and even integration and how burden reduction can fit into another Da Vinci use case such as PCT. And then, of course, our wrap up. I want to thank the primary participants this past September. This is a little smaller group than we typically have, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It's not people getting tired of it as much as I think a lot of it is with deadlines coming. There's a lot of rollouts and a lot of heads down work going on. So some were not able to attend, and for various other reasons not to be there. But really want to thank Cativity, and which formerly EdFX, eHealth Exchange, Aegis, Meditech. Meditech's really stepped up as the EHR system to integrate and provide services in our Connectathon testing. InterSystems, Cognizant, AMA again, Nicural, another EHR, and of course my own Lantana consulting group doing the reference implementations. Special call out to Cognizant. They're brand new to our efforts. Like a week before the Connectathon, I'm talking, contacted me and wanted to join in. I welcomed them in, and they were as energetic as any team there with a lot of report out information. So it's really great. So kudos to them for doing that on a very short turnaround. I think I missed a slide there, but one of the reports that report out information pieces that I wanted to provide was that, and I told this at the Connectathon report out and also at the financial management and PI work group updates that I was giving. I think what stood out to me about this was not just that a couple things like CRD is becoming much more mature in its testing. I think we're making great progress with that. PAS is even becoming exceptionally well tested. I think still a lot of pieces left to go, but I think we're seeing a lot more of that. DTR is actually the least tested. I think there's a few reasons for that, but one in particular is the CQL and the lift for that and the forms presentation and such. And also I think that it's felt like once they overcome that, that the forms themselves are probably not going to be too difficult. But those are a lot of great things. But one of the hidden benefits that I see out of this is failure. And my colleague at Lantana, Rick Geimer, has always said this, and it's stuck with me, and that is that at a Connectathon, failure is always an option, because this is where we want to actually surface issues. If they exist, we want to surface them. Obviously, we want successes and as many as we can get. But this is the place, not production and not beta. We want at Connectathons to surface those issues. So I saw excitement from, for example, Cognizant when they came in and they said, oh, this didn't work, but we were actually able to get with the team we're testing with and figure it out. Learn a little bit more about the IG that maybe wasn't obvious at first and make it work. So the failures sometimes are as exciting in the sense that um, we're getting these things out of the way now. The maturing process is taking place and it's happening. And it's really exciting, I think, and that's what I saw from our participants. So I really have to give thanks to all these participants and all the others that are normally on there. You know, Z Omega and several others that too many to name right now that for whatever reason couldn't make it to this one, but are consistent and kind of the pillars of our testing efforts. So again, thank you for this time to talk about this. I hope this was helpful. Any questions from anyone? If not, then Michelle, I will pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Really appreciate the information. I saw some applause go up as well. We'd certainly like to encourage folks to, I see a message in the chat. I'll take a look. A great presentation. We'd like to encourage folks to join the trebuchet work, become a part of a pilot, create your own pilot. And certainly continue to apply what's learned at Connectathon, your own institutions, and really start to build out that fail safe environment, if you will, as you prep to scale in production. So with that, I'll close as well. I'll do a long pause to see if we have any additional questions or any questions. And if not, again, Scott, appreciate it. Oh, Mike, I saw you come off mute.
No, just a note of thanks to Jeff and everybody that attended today.
Very good. Have a great rest of the week, everyone, and take care. Hope to see you in 2 weeks.